The Sahara Desert in the spring of 1942 was not empty space, but a chessboard where three empires maneuvered for strategic advantage that would determine the outcome of the North African campaign and perhaps the entire Mediterranean theater of the Second World War. To the north, along the Libyan coast, Rommel's Afrika Korps and the Italian 10th Army pressed against British forces defending Egypt and the Suez Canal, that critical artery through which oil from the Persian Gulf and troops from India flowed to sustain Britain's war effort. To the south, in the vast interior of Libya known as the Fezzan, lay territory that appeared on maps as blank space annotated with warnings about impassable terrain and absence of water, but which in reality contained routes that could outflank the entire coastal war, oases that could support mechanized forces, and, according to persistent intelligence reports, installations that the Italians had been developing since their conquest of Libya in the 1930s. The Fezzan itself is one of the harshest environments on Earth. It occupies the southwestern quadrant of Libya, a region roughly the size of France, consisting primarily of sand seas, rocky Hamada plateaus, and volcanic massifs that rise without warning from perfectly flat desert. Temperatures in March range from near freezing at night to 110 degrees Fahrenheit during midday. Water exists only at widely scattered oases, most of them controlled by Tuareg and Tibu peoples who had navigated these wastes for millennia and who regarded the Italian colonizers with a hostility that occasionally erupted into open resistance. The few roads were tracks scratched into stone or marked by oil drums, navigable only by vehicles with desert experience and comprehensive navigation equipment. It was territory that conventional military thinking considered irrelevant to the war, too remote, too inhospitable, offering no strategic objectives worth the logistical nightmare of operating there. But British intelligence thought differently. Throughout late 1941 and early 1942, the Long-Range Desert Group, an elite reconnaissance and raiding force established specifically to operate in the deep desert, had been conducting patrols through the Fezzan, mapping routes, monitoring Italian garrisons, and gathering intelligence on enemy dispositions. The LRDG operated in patrols of 30 to 40 men mounted in 300-weight Chevrolet trucks modified for desert warfare, equipped with sun compasses, theodolites for navigation, and enough fuel, water, and ammunition to operate independently for 3 weeks. They were the eyes of the British Eighth Army in regions where conventional reconnaissance aircraft could not reliably operate due to distance and navigational challenges. One particular patrol, T2 Patrol, consisting of 2 officers and 38 enlisted men from the Guards regiments, commanded by Captain Michael Clayton, had been tasked with investigating reports of unusual Italian activity in the region southwest of the oasis of Merzouk. The reports were fragmentary and came primarily from Tuareg informants who traded with both sides and whose information had to be carefully evaluated for reliability. They spoke of Italian convoys moving into the deep desert carrying construction materials, of labor battalions working at a location that the informants described only as Al-Qasr al-Mafqud, the Lost Fortress. The informants claimed the location shifted, that Italian supply columns sometimes failed to find it, despite following coordinates that had worked previously, that the desert itself seemed to protect or conceal whatever the Italians were building there. British intelligence officers in Cairo evaluated these reports with skepticism. The Italians had constructed numerous desert outposts throughout the Fezzan, small forts garrisoned by colonial troops designed to control oases and intimidate the local population into compliance. That one of these might be difficult to locate due to poor navigation or deliberate deception was unremarkable. But the reports persisted and grew more specific. Italian deserters, interrogated after being captured during coastal operations, mentioned a facility in the deep Fezzan referred to as Fortezza Miraggio, Mirage Fortress, a name that seemed to confirm the Tuareg accounts of a location that appeared and disappeared. One deserter, a sergeant from a construction battalion, claimed he had worked at the facility for 2 months but could not identify its location on a map, could not describe the route used to reach it, and became agitated when pressed for details, finally stating that the fortress was not in the same desert as the other Italian installations he had served at. By March 1942, British command decided the reports warranted direct investigation. Captain Clayton's T2 patrol was given coordinates derived from multiple Tuareg accounts and Italian prisoner interrogations, supplied for a 3-week operation, and ordered to locate the facility, determine its purpose and defensive strength, and report back via radio. The patrol departed from the British forward base at Kufra Oasis on March 8th, navigating southwest into the Fezzan using sun compass and dead reckoning across terrain that appeared on their maps as blank space marked only with spot elevations and the occasional wadi notation. They were operating more than 400 miles behind enemy lines in desert where mechanical breakdown or navigation error meant death, with the nearest friendly forces a week's travel away, even if everything went perfectly. The mission was routine by LRDG standards: deep penetration reconnaissance, gather intelligence, avoid contact if possible, return with information that staff officers could use for planning. But from the beginning, the patrol experienced anomalies that Captain Clayton noted carefully in his log. Compasses behaved erratically in certain areas, their needles spinning or pointing in directions that did not correspond to magnetic north. Navigation by sun and stars, normally reliable within a mile or two over long distances, produced positions that differed from dead reckoning by amounts that exceeded acceptable error margins. Twice, the patrol's radio operator reported hearing transmissions in Italian that faded in and out despite the frequency being clear of interference, transmissions that seemed to be coming from directions where no Italian installations were known to exist. The local Tuareg, encountered at a small oasis on March 10th, where the patrol stopped to top off water supplies, were reluctant to discuss the area the British were planning to enter. Through an interpreter, a Sanusi Arab who served as the patrol's guide, the Tuareg headman warned that the region southwest of Murzouk was Makan Mashur, a bewitched place, cursed ground, where the desert did not follow its own rules. He spoke of travelers who had entered that region and never returned, of caravans that had vanished without trace, of structures seen from a distance that could not be reached, no matter how long one traveled toward them. The Tuareg had their own name for the phenomenon: Qasr al-Jinn, the fortress of the jinn, spirits of fire and air who, according to pre-Islamic tradition, could create palaces that existed between the world of men and the world of spirits, visible but unreachable, real but not entirely present in the physical desert. Captain Clayton recorded these warnings in his patrol log, but gave them no operational weight. Local folklore, the sort of mythology that accumulated in any region where the environment was hostile enough to kill the unwary, and where disappearances could be more easily attributed to supernatural causes than to dehydration, navigation error, or hostile action. The LRDG operated according to rational principles: navigation by mathematics and instruments, survival through discipline and preparation, success through training and experience. Ghost fortresses and jinn were not factors that appeared in their tactical planning. They had coordinates, they had vehicles, they had sufficient supplies, and they had orders. On the morning of March 12th, T2 patrol departed the Tuareg oasis and drove southwest into the deep Fezzan, toward a location that the Italians called Fortezza Miraggio and the Tuareg called Qasr al-Jinn, following coordinates that would lead them to a fortress that may have existed in more than one version of the desert at the same time. T2. Patrol had been driving for 3 hours when Lieutenant James Hallworth, serving as navigator, called a halt to reconcile conflicting position data. The patrol consisted of 11 Chevrolet trucks arranged in loose column, maintaining 50-yard spacing to minimize dust interference and reduce vulnerability to air attack. Each vehicle carried a crew of 3 to 4 men plus equipment, Lewis guns mounted on improvised pintles, spare fuel, and water in jerry cans lashed to every available surface, navigation instruments wrapped in canvas against the sand, and personal kit reduced to absolute essentials. The trucks themselves were painted in a camouflage scheme meant to blend with desert terrain, though at speed they raised dust plumes visible for miles that made concealment impossible. Hallworth was 26 years old, a mathematics graduate from Cambridge who had joined the Coldstream Guards in 1939 and volunteered for the LRDG because it offered opportunities to apply theoretical knowledge to practical problems under extreme conditions. He was meticulous in his navigation work, cross-checking sun compass readings against dead reckoning, verifying estimates against star shots taken at dawn and dusk, maintaining a running plot on maps that were often inaccurate or simply blank in regions where no survey had been conducted. His concern this morning was that multiple independent navigation methods were producing inconsistent results, not by small margins that could be attributed to instrument error or cumulative drift, but by significant amounts that suggested something was interfering with the fundamental principles of desert navigation. Captain Clayton dismounted from the lead vehicle and walked back to Hallworth's truck, where the navigator had spread maps across the hood and was working through calculations with a slide rule. "What's the problem, James?" Clayton was 32, a career guards officer who had spent the 1930s in various colonial postings and understood that desert warfare required different skills than conventional operations. He trusted his specialist NCOs and junior officers, particularly when they expressed concern about matters within their expertise. Hallworth pointed to 3 separate position marks on the map. "Sir, these are our positions according to different methods. This one," he indicated a pencil mark in red, "is dead reckoning from our last known position at the oasis. This one, blue, is from sun compass and odometer readings. And this one, green, is from a star shot I took at dawn and worked up during the drive." The 3 marks formed a triangle roughly 8 miles on each side. They should all agree within a mile, 2 at most. But we have an 8-mile spread, which means at least 2 of these methods are producing incorrect data, or the maps are wrong, or something is interfering with our instruments. Clayton studied the marks. All 3 positions placed the patrol in an area the map labeled simply as Hamada al-Hamra, the Red Plateau, a region of flat stone desert that extended for hundreds of square miles. No distinctive terrain features were marked except for a few spot elevations and a notation indicating area of magnetic anomaly with a date from an Italian geological survey conducted in 1936. Clayton tapped this notation. "Could this be affecting the compass?" "Possibly, sir. But it shouldn't affect dead reckoning or celestial navigation. Those are independent of magnetic fields." Hallworth paused, then continued carefully. "There's something else, sir. Sergeant Cooper, the patrol's signals specialist, has been picking up radio transmissions that don't make sense. Italian traffic, but the direction finding suggests it's coming from a bearing where we know there are no Italian installations. And the signal strength varies in ways that don't correspond to atmospheric conditions or time of day." Clayton considered this. Radio propagation in the desert could be unpredictable. Temperature inversions, ionospheric disturbances, reflections off rock formations could all produce anomalous results. But combined with the navigation problems, it suggested they were operating in an area where the normal rules were not reliably applying. "All right, we'll proceed using dead reckoning as primary, verify with sun compass, and I want star shots every evening and morning until we're out of this region. Have Cooper monitor those radio signals and try to get accurate direction finding on them. If there's an Italian installation out here that's not on our intelligence maps, we need to know about it." The patrol resumed movement at 1100 hours, driving southwest across terrain that was monotonous in its emptiness, Flat red stone broken occasionally by low ridges or shallow wadis that carried water perhaps once every decade. The heat was building toward its midday peak, making the air shimmer and creating mirages that appeared as lakes on the horizon, perfect reflections of sky that vanished as the trucks approached. Mirages were common in the desert, and experienced LRDG personnel learned to ignore them, but several of the men noted that the mirages today seemed more persistent than usual, and that some of them appeared to show structures, buildings, or fortifications, rather than just water. Private Thomas Bingham, serving as driver on the fourth truck in the column, mentioned this to his vehicle commander, Corporal Davies. "Corp, you see that?" He pointed to a mirage perhaps 2 miles ahead and slightly off their line of march. A shimmering formation that suggested walls and towers, geometric shapes too regular to be natural terrain. "Looks like a fort or something." Davies studied it through binoculars. Mirages were common enough, but this one had an unusual quality. The shimmer was confined to the structure itself, rather than spreading across the horizon as temperature gradients normally produced. And it appeared solid, not wavering the way mirages typically did. "Keep your eyes on the route, Bingham. It's just heat distortion." But Davies continued to watch the mirage as they drove, and noted that it maintained its apparent position despite the patrol's movement. Normally, mirages shifted and changed as the observer's position changed, but this one seemed fixed to a specific location on the ground. By 1300 hours, with the sun directly overhead and temperatures approaching 115 degrees Fahrenheit, Captain Clayton ordered a halt for the midday rest period. LRDG doctrine called for stopping during the hottest part of the day, sheltering under vehicles or canvas, conserving water and energy until temperatures dropped enough to make movement less punishing for both men and machines. The trucks pulled into a loose defensive formation, sentries were posted, and the patrol settled into the routine of desert existence, checking vehicles for mechanical issues, cleaning weapons against sand infiltration, eating cold rations because cooking fires in hostile territory were forbidden, sleeping if possible, despite the heat. Lieutenant Hallworth used the halt to conduct another navigation check. He took a sun shot with his theodolite, worked through the calculations, and marked the result on his map. Then he walked to Captain Clayton's position beneath a canvas shelter rigged between two trucks. "Sir, we have a problem. My noon shot puts us 3 miles east of where Dead Reckoning says we should be. That's an unacceptable error over the distance we've traveled this morning." Clayton studied the map, comparing Hallworth's marks. "Could we have drifted off course? Followed a bearing incorrectly?" "Not by this amount, sir. I've been checking compass headings continuously, and the drivers are experienced. We should be within a mile of our intended track." Hallworth hesitated, then continued. "Sir, there's another possibility. If the maps are incorrect, if the terrain doesn't actually match what the Italian surveys show, then Dead Reckoning based on distance and bearing could be accurate while the map positions are wrong. We might be exactly where we think we are in terms of distance traveled, but the ground itself is in a different location than the map indicates." This was a disturbing possibility. LRDG operations depended absolutely on accurate navigation. Without it, patrols could miss their objectives by dozens of miles, exhaust their supplies searching for targets or water sources, or simply become lost in terrain where being lost meant death. Clayton had operated in the desert long enough to know that maps of the Fezzan were often based on limited survey data, that features could be misplaced by significant distances, that blank spaces on maps sometimes concealed terrain that differed radically from assumptions. But the degree of error Hallworth was describing suggested either systematic instrument failure across multiple independent systems or terrain that was fundamentally different from what their maps showed. "Continue with navigation checks at every halt," Clayton ordered. "I want to know if this error is systematic or random, increasing or stable. And get with Cooper. I want to correlate our position problems with those radio signals he's been tracking. If there's a relationship, I need to understand it." He paused, looking southwest toward the coordinates they were attempting to reach, toward the location where the Italians had supposedly constructed Fortezza Miraggio. "James, have you ever operated in an area where navigation was this unreliable?" Hallworth considered. "No, sir. Not to this degree. I've dealt with magnetic anomalies that affected compasses, and I've seen cumulative error in dead reckoning, but never multiple independent methods all producing different results that don't reconcile. It's as if—" He stopped, uncertain whether to voice what he was thinking. "Go on." "Sir, it's as if we're not navigating through consistent space. As if the relationship between points isn't fixed the way it should be. I know that sounds absurd, but I can't think of another explanation that fits the data." Clayton nodded slowly. He had heard the Tuareg warnings about Makan Mashur, bewitched space where the desert did not follow its own rules. He had dismissed it as folklore, but folklore often contained practical knowledge encoded in supernatural language. Perhaps what the Tuareg meant was that this region exhibited navigational properties that made conventional mapping unreliable, that travelers attempting to reach specific locations found the relationship between distance and destination unstable, that, in effect, the geometry of the space itself was non-Euclidean in some way, that primitive people described as magic, and that modern soldiers experienced as instrument failure. The patrol resumed movement at 1600 hours, when temperatures dropped below 100 degrees. They continued southwest, following the bearing that should take them to the target coordinates, but Clayton noticed that the feeling of the desert had changed. The emptiness felt different, not hostile exactly, but alien, as if they were entering territory that operated under different physical principles. Mirages became more frequent and more distinct, showing structures that appeared solid and real until approached. The light had a quality he had never encountered before, a crystalline clarity that made distances impossible to judge accurately. And the radio signals that Sergeant Cooper monitored grew stronger and more regular, transmissions in Italian that sounded like routine garrison traffic, but that direction finding placed an empty desert where no garrison should exist. At 1830 hours, as the sun touched the western horizon and the desert light shifted to gold and amber, the patrol crested a low rise, and Captain Clayton called an immediate halt. There, perhaps 5 miles ahead, visible with perfect clarity in the evening light, stood a fortress. Not a mirage, not a heat distortion, but an actual structure. Walls of stone or concrete rising from the desert floor, towers at the corners, what appeared to be vehicle tracks leading to a gate on the near side. It matched the descriptions from Italian deserters and Tuareg informants. It occupied the approximate position of the coordinates they had been given, and it had not been visible from any position before they crested this specific rise, despite the fact that a structure of that size should have been visible for at least 10 miles in the clear desert air. Clayton raised his binoculars and studied the fortress in detail. The architecture was odd. The walls seemed to shift slightly as he watched, their outline wavering in ways that resembled heat shimmer, but more pronounced and localized. The towers appeared solid and real, but their position relative to each other seemed to change subtly when he shifted his observation point. And there was no movement, no sentries visible on the walls, no vehicles near the gate, no smoke from cooking fires or generators. Just absolute stillness and silence, a fortress that existed but appeared to be unpopulated, a structure that should have been impossible to miss, but that they had seen for the first time only when they crested this particular ridge. Lieutenant Hallworth stood beside Clayton, staring at the fortress through his own binoculars. "Sir," he said quietly, "that's not on any map. And based on our navigation, it shouldn't be where it is. We're looking at something that exists, but doesn't fit the geometry of the space it occupies." He lowered his binoculars and looked at Clayton. "Sir, I don't think we found an Italian installation." I think we found what the Tuareg warned us about. We found Qasr al-Jinn. Captain Clayton established the patrol in a defensive position behind the ridgeline, vehicles dispersed and camouflaged with nets, sentries posted, and strict radio silence maintained except for scheduled communication windows with base. He then organized a reconnaissance element, himself, Lieutenant Hallworth, Sergeant Cooper with a portable radio, and 4 experienced desert soldiers to conduct a close observation of the fortress under cover of approaching darkness. They would advance on foot to within 1 kilometer, observe through the night using binoculars and a spotting scope, document what they saw, and return to the main patrol by dawn. Standard reconnaissance protocol for assessing an unknown installation before committing forces to direct action. They departed at 1930 hours as the last light faded from the western sky and the desert temperature began its nightly plunge toward freezing. Each man carried a weapon, Thompson submachine guns, and a Bren light machine gun, plus water, emergency rations, navigation equipment, and notebooks for recording observations. They moved in tactical formation across terrain that appeared flat in the failing light, but revealed itself to be broken by small wadis and rock outcrops that provided concealment, if not cover. The fortress remained visible ahead of them, a dark mass against the darkening sky. And as they closed the distance, Clayton noted details that increased his unease. The fortress was larger than it had appeared from the ridge, walls perhaps 20 feet high, enclosing an area of several acres, with corner towers rising another 10 feet above the walls. The construction appeared to be concrete or stone, difficult to determine in the uncertain light, but the surface had a quality that seemed wrong, too smooth, too uniform, as if the entire structure had been cast as a single piece rather than built in courses. There were no visible joints or seams in the walls, no evidence of scaffolding or construction equipment that should have been present if the facility was still being built. And most disturbing, the structure's outline continued to waver slightly, not with the regular rhythm of heat shimmer, but with an irregular pulsing that suggested the fortress was not entirely stable in its physical manifestation. At 2000 hours, with full darkness established and stars emerging in the crystalline desert sky, the reconnaissance element reached a position approximately 1,000 meters from the fortress's eastern wall. They established an observation post behind a low ridge of volcanic rock, set up the spotting scope, and began systematic documentation. Sergeant Cooper unpacked the portable radio and began monitoring frequencies, while Lieutenant Hallworth took compass bearings and attempted to fix the fortress's position using star sights and triangulation from their known starting point. The first oddity became apparent immediately. Through the spotting scope, Captain Clayton could see details of the fortress wall with perfect clarity. The texture of the concrete, what appeared to be firing ports or observation slits, a gate large enough for vehicles to pass through. But when he tried to sketch these details in his notebook, his hand seemed to resist, as if some part of his brain was refusing to commit the observations to paper. He forced the sketch anyway, producing a rough diagram that showed the wall's outline and major features. When he looked back at the fortress and then at his sketch, they did not match. The fortress had changed, not dramatically, but subtly, as if it had shifted position or altered its configuration while he was looking away. Hallworth experienced similar difficulties with navigation. He took a series of star shots to establish the fortress's position, worked through his calculations carefully, and marked the result on his map. Then he took another series of shots 30 minutes later to verify, and got a different result, not by a small margin consistent with instrument error, but by nearly 2 miles, as if the fortress had moved during the observation period, even though visual observation showed it had remained stationary. He repeated the process twice more with the same confusing results. "Sir," he reported to Clayton, "I can't establish a consistent position for this structure. Every measurement I take produces a different result. It's as if it's not fixed in space the way normal objects are. Sergeant Cooper had his own disturbing findings. The Italian radio traffic he had been monitoring since midday was now clearly coming from the fortress. His direction-finding equipment pointed directly at it with no ambiguity. But the content of the transmissions made no tactical sense. They were routine garrison communications, requests for supplies, weather reports, personnel matters, all conducted with proper Italian military procedure and protocols. But they referenced dates that were wrong. One transmission mentioned an event scheduled for 15 September 1937, as if the broadcast was occurring 5 years in the past. Another mentioned personnel expected to arrive after the victory, phrasing that suggested the speaker believed the war was already won. And occasionally, the transmissions would shift to different voices, different units, different time periods, as if Cooper was monitoring not a single radio network, but multiple networks from different eras, all overlapping on the same frequencies. "Sir," Cooper reported, keeping his voice steady despite obvious disquiet, "I'm picking up Italian signals that can't all be coming from the same source at the same time. Some reference dates from before the war, others reference current operations, and a few seem to be discussing events that haven't happened yet. It's as if multiple timelines are bleeding through on the same channel." Clayton absorbed this. Radio propagation anomalies could produce strange effects. Signals bouncing off ionospheric layers could arrive delayed, could overlap with current transmissions, could create the illusion of temporal displacement. But the consistency of Cooper's observations, combined with the navigation problems and the visual anomalies, suggested something more fundamental than radio interference. They were observing a fortress that did not obey normal physical principles, that existed in space but not consistently, that generated radio signals from multiple time periods simultaneously. As midnight approached, the fortress revealed another property that moved beyond disturbing into genuinely frightening. Private Bingham, one of the soldiers on perimeter security, called Clayton over to his position and pointed toward the fortress without speaking. Clayton raised his binoculars and saw what had alarmed Bingham. The fortress was occupied. Figures moved along the walls, men in uniform, visible as silhouettes against the slightly lighter sky. A vehicle moved through the gate, its headlights briefly visible before being extinguished. Smoke rose from what must be a chimney or generator exhaust. The fortress was functioning as an active military installation, garrisoned and operational. But none of this activity had been visible an hour earlier. The fortress had been completely dark and silent during their entire approach and initial observation period. Now, suddenly, it was alive with activity, not a gradual increase as personnel woke or shifts changed, but an instantaneous transition from abandoned to occupied. And the figures on the walls moved with a quality that Clayton recognized from years of military service but had never seen executed quite this way. They were conducting sentry duty, pacing fixed routes, maintaining proper spacing and observation sectors. But they moved too regularly, too mechanically, repeating patterns with inhuman precision. Real sentries showed variation. They shifted weight, adjusted their pace, paused to light cigarettes or stretch. These sentries moved like clockwork, like animated figures in a mechanical display, perfectly consistent from one circuit to the next. Lieutenant Hallworth, observing the same phenomenon through the spotting scope, spoke quietly. "Sir, those aren't real soldiers. Or if they are, they're not present in the same way we are. Look at their shadows." He adjusted the scope and Clayton looked through it. The sentries cast shadows from the fortress's interior lights, but the shadows were wrong. They didn't lengthen or shorten as the sentries moved relative to the light sources. They remained constant, as if painted on the walls rather than cast by physical objects blocking light. And when one sentry passed in front of what should have been a light source, the light didn't dim or flicker. It continued unobstructed, as if the sentry was transparent to illumination while remaining opaque to visual observation. The reconnaissance element maintained observation throughout the night, documenting everything they witnessed in notebooks and attempting to capture the impossible with sketches and measurements that refused to remain consistent. The fortress cycled through periods of activity and abandonment with no discernible pattern, sometimes teeming with personnel and vehicles, sometimes completely dark and silent, the transitions occurring instantaneously rather than gradually. Radio traffic followed similar patterns, surging and fading according to no schedule Cooper could determine. And the fortress's physical structure continued to exhibit instability, its walls appearing to shift position slightly, its towers seeming to lean or straighten, its gate appearing on different walls depending on the observer's angle of approach. At 0300 hours, an event occurred that would be documented in multiple independent accounts and would form the core of the classified report Clayton would eventually file. The fortress vanished. Not gradually, not obscured by weather or darkness, but simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, walls clearly visible in the starlight, interior lights glowing, the shape and mass of a substantial military installation occupying several acres of desert. The next moment, between one heartbeat and the next, it was gone. The space it had occupied was empty desert, undisturbed sand and rock, with no evidence that any structure had ever stood there. The reconnaissance element remained in position, staring at the empty ground where the fortress had been, each man trying to reconcile what he had just witnessed with any rational explanation. After perhaps 2 minutes of stunned silence, Private Bingham spoke. "Sir, are we still looking at the right place? Did we somehow lose our bearing?" Hallworth checked his compass and verified against star positions. "We're looking at exactly the same location. The fortress was there. Now it's not." He paused, then added, "Sir, the Tuareg called it the Fortress of the Jinn. They said it appeared and disappeared. They said travelers couldn't reach it no matter how they tried. I think we've just seen why. It's not always present. It phases in and out of our observable reality." Clayton was about to respond when Sergeant Cooper urgently waved for attention. "Sir, I'm still receiving radio signals from that location. The fortress is gone, but the transmissions continue. Same bearing, same signal strength, as if the radio source is still there, even though the physical structure isn't." He adjusted his receiver, held up a hand for silence, then reported, "Sir, they're broadcasting in clear. Italian garrison routine. Date stamp is today. Current time. They're reporting normal status. All personnel accounted for. No enemy contact. They don't seem to know their fortress has disappeared." The fortress remained absent for 18 minutes. Then, as abruptly as it had vanished, it returned, not materializing gradually, but simply present again, occupying the same space, showing the same lights and activity, as if it had never been gone. The sentries on the walls continued their mechanical patrol patterns without interruption. The vehicle that had been visible in the courtyard remained in the same position. The radio traffic continued without any indication that anything unusual had occurred. Whatever mechanism controlled the fortress's presence or absence, it operated without regard to the perceptions or observations of external witnesses. Captain Clayton made his decision. "We've seen enough. This facility is beyond our capability to assess or engage. We're returning to the patrol, preparing a comprehensive report, and withdrawing to base. This is intelligence for higher headquarters, possibly for scientific evaluation. We're reconnaissance, not equipped to deal with phenomena that violate physical laws." He began gathering equipment, then paused and looked at each member of the reconnaissance element. "I want detailed written accounts from each of you, prepared independently, documenting exactly what you observed. Multiple witness statements will carry more weight than a single report. And until we understand what we're dealing with, we maintain operational security. This information goes up the chain through proper channels, not discussed casually." They returned to the main patrol position by 0500 hours, climbing back over the ridge as the eastern sky began to pale toward dawn. When Clayton looked back at the fortress one final time, it was gone again. The desert empty. The coordinates they had been sent to investigate occupied by nothing but sand and rock and the vast indifference of the Sahara. But whether it was truly gone or simply not visible from this angle or at this moment, he could not determine. The fortress existed. Of that he was certain. But it did not exist in the way that normal military installations existed, bound to a single location and single timeline, subject to the physics that governed every other object in the observable universe. They had found Fortezza Miraggio. They had found Qasr al-Jinn, and they had discovered that some military objectives could not be captured or destroyed because they were not entirely present in the war they were trying to fight. Captain Clayton had intended to withdraw immediately to return to Kufra with the intelligence they had gathered and let higher command determine how to handle a fortress that appeared to exist outside normal space-time. But at dawn, as the patrol prepared to depart, three things occurred that changed his decision. First, the fortress reappeared, not where it had been the previous evening, but approximately 2 miles closer to their position, occupying ground that Hallworth's navigation placed in a direction that should have been north, but which compass bearings indicated was actually west. Second, Sergeant Cooper intercepted radio traffic that suggested Italian forces were aware of the British patrol's presence and were preparing a response. And third, 2 Tuareg riders approached the patrol's position under a white flag, requesting to speak with the British commander. Clayton received the Tuareg through the patrol's Sanusi interpreter. They were an elderly man who identified himself as a Amenokal, a traditional leader, and a younger man who served as his guide. The Amenokal spoke in Tamahak, the Tuareg language, which the interpreter rendered into Arabic and then English with inevitable loss of precision. But the essential message was clear. The British patrol had entered a region that the Tuareg considered forbidden territory, ground where the normal rules of the desert did not apply, and their presence had awakened something that had been dormant. The fortress sleeps when not disturbed, the Amenokal explained through the layers of translation. It dreams of the wars it has witnessed, the armies that have fought over this ground. When soldiers come, whether Italian or British or French or Ottoman before them, the fortress wakes. It shows itself. And sometimes it takes those who approach it, not always into death, but into elsewhere, into the time it is dreaming of. We have lost people to it. Caravans that entered the region and never returned. Travelers who walked into that area and vanished as if they had never existed. Clayton asked the obvious question. If the region was forbidden, why had the Italians been able to construct a fortress there? The Amenokal's response, filtered through translation, was troubling. The Italians had not constructed the fortress. They had discovered it, found it during a geological survey in the mid-1930s, realized it appeared and disappeared according to some pattern they did not understand, and attempted to use it, to garrison it during its periods of manifestation, to store supplies there, to use it as a forward base for operations in the Deep Fezzan. Some of those attempts had succeeded. Others had failed catastrophically, with entire Italian units entering the fortress during one of its appearance cycles and never emerging, even when the fortress reappeared later. The Italians called it Fortezza Miraggio because it behaved like a mirage, visible but unreachable, real but not permanent. The Tuareg called it Qasr al-Jinn because they believed it was a structure built by jinn in the ancient times, a fortress that existed in the spirit world and only occasionally manifested in the physical desert. You should leave, the Amenokal said through the interpreter. Leave now, while the fortress is visible and you know where it is. If you remain, it may move again, may appear in a different location or a different time. And if you enter it, He made a gesture that the interpreter explained meant something like crossing a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. If you enter it, you may not return to the desert you left. The fortress shows different things to different people. It exists in many times at once. Those who enter may find themselves in battles that occurred decades or centuries ago, or in futures that have not yet happened. The Italians learned this. Some of their soldiers are still inside, trapped in whatever time the fortress decided to show them. Clayton thanked the Tuareg for their warning and assured them the patrol would withdraw. But as the Aminical and his guide departed, Clayton confronted the tactical reality that made immediate withdrawal impossible. Sergeant Cooper reported that Italian radio traffic indicated an enemy force, strength unknown, but at least company-sized, based on the volume of communications, was moving toward their position from the north. The Italians had detected the British patrol, probably through radio direction finding or possibly through observation by aircraft that the patrol had not seen, and were moving to engage. The LRDG's advantage was mobility and surprise. In a direct engagement with superior forces, they would be destroyed. The fortress, visible now in the clear morning light approximately 3 kilometers to the southwest, represented the only terrain feature within 20 miles that offered any possibility of cover or defensive advantage. The desert around them was flat hamada, offering no concealment and no obstacles to slow pursuing vehicles. Clayton faced a choice between withdrawing across open ground with enemy forces closing from the north, or moving toward the fortress and potentially using it as a defensive position despite the Tuareg warnings about its unstable nature. Neither option was good, but one offered at least the possibility of survival. He made his decision at 0700 hours. We advanced toward the fortress, not to enter it, but to use the ground around it for defensive positions if we're forced to engage. Hallworth, plot the approach route. I want us positioned where we can observe both the fortress and the direction of enemy approach. Cooper, maintain listening watch on Italian frequencies and inform me the moment you have better intelligence on their location and strength. All vehicles, combat loads, weapons manned, prepare for contact. The patrol moved out at 0715, 11 trucks in tactical formation, driving toward a fortress that might not remain in existence long enough for them to reach it. The approach was surreal. As they closed the distance, the fortress seemed to recede, maintaining its apparent position on the horizon despite their forward movement. Hallworth, navigating from the lead truck, noted that dead reckoning indicated they should have reached the fortress within 20 minutes based on its observed range, but after 30 minutes of driving, it appeared no closer. The odometers showed they had traveled the correct distance. The compass bearings remained steady, but the fortress remained approximately 3 kilometers away, as if the space between the patrol and their objective was somehow elastic, expanding as they attempted to traverse it. At 0800 hours, the nature of the space suddenly changed. One moment the fortress was distant and unreachable. The next moment the patrol was approaching its walls directly, close enough to see details of construction and to identify what appeared to be Italian military vehicles parked near the gate. The transition was not gradual. It occurred instantaneously, as if the patrol had been transported across the intervening distance without actually traveling through it. Several of the drivers reported momentary disorientation, a sensation of movement without physical displacement, and one truck swerved violently before the driver regained control. Clayton ordered a halt 500 meters from the fortress walls and dismounted to conduct visual reconnaissance. Through binoculars, he could see that the fortress was definitely of Italian construction, concrete walls reinforced with steel, military standard watchtowers, a vehicle gate that matched Italian colonial fort designs. But it was also wrong in subtle ways. The walls were too smooth, showing no weathering, despite supposedly being constructed in the mid-30s. The Italian vehicles near the gate were types that Clayton recognized, but they appeared new rather than showing the wear that desert service inevitably produced. And there was still no movement. No sentries, no personnel visible anywhere. The vehicles parked but apparently unattended. Lieutenant Hallworth approached with troubling navigation data. "Sir, I've taken multiple position fixes. According to every method I have, we are currently occupying the same coordinates as the fortress. We're not 500 meters from it, we're inside it, or rather, it's occupying the same space we are but shifted somehow, so we perceive it as external to our position." He showed Clayton his calculations. "Sir, I don't think we can actually reach the fortress by conventional movement. I think we're already there. We're just not aligned with it properly." Before Clayton could respond, Sergeant Cooper reported urgent radio traffic. "Sir, Italian transmission in clear. They've made visual contact with the fortress, range approximately 6 kilometers to our north. They're reporting it as..." He paused, listening, then continued with obvious disbelief. "Sir, they're reporting it as a British installation. They believe we've established a forward base here and they're preparing to assault it." Clayton processed this. The Italians could see the fortress from the north and perceived it as British occupied. The British patrol could see it from the south and identified it as Italian constructed. The fortress was showing different things to different observers, presenting itself according to the expectations or preconceptions of whoever was looking at it, which meant that when the Italian force arrived and assaulted what they believed to be a British position, they would be attacking the same fortress that Clayton's patrol was attempting to use as defensive cover. Both sides would converge on the same location, but they might not be converging on the same version of the fortress. At 0830, the tactical situation deteriorated further. The Italian force appeared on the northern horizon, approximately 15 vehicles, a mixture of trucks and light tanks, far superior to the LRDG patrol in both numbers and firepower. They were advancing in combat formation directly toward the fortress, and they would be in effective engagement range within 15 minutes. Clayton had to decide immediately: withdraw across open ground and accept significant casualties from pursuing Italian armor, or advance into the fortress and hope that whatever spatial anomalies it exhibited would provide some protection or at least confusion that might allow the patrol to survive. He chose the fortress. At 0835, T2 patrol began moving forward, closing the final 500 meters to the walls. As they approached, several things happened simultaneously. The fortress walls became transparent, not invisible, but translucent, showing both the concrete surface and something behind or within it, structures that looked older than the Italian construction, architecture from different periods overlapping like multiple exposures on a photograph. The ground beneath the trucks began to feel insubstantial, as if they were driving on a surface that was only partially solid, and the light changed, acquiring a quality that Clayton had seen only in the moments before severe desert storms, a strange amber-green color that made everything appear distant and unreal. Private Bingham, driving the lead truck, reported through the radio net, "Sir, the gate is open. I can see inside. There are people in there, Italian soldiers, but they're not moving. They're just standing in formation like statues, like they're frozen." Clayton looked through his binoculars and confirmed Bingham's observation. Through the open gate, visible in the courtyard beyond, stood what appeared to be an Italian infantry company in parade formation, perhaps 100 men in perfect ranks, weapons at present arms, absolutely motionless, not standing at attention in the way that living soldiers stand, but truly frozen, as if time inside the fortress had stopped while the world outside continued. And behind them, visible through windows or doorways in the fortress's interior buildings, more figures, soldiers from other eras wearing uniforms Clayton could not identify, cavalry and infantry, and armor from wars that predated the 20th century, all frozen in various poses, all apparently unaware that they were trapped in a fortress that existed in multiple times simultaneously. The patrol passed through the gate at 0840. The sensation was like passing through cold water, a moment of resistance and disorientation, a feeling of being in two places at once, and then they were inside. The courtyard was larger than it had appeared from outside, stretching perhaps 200 meters in each direction, far too large to fit within the walls they had observed from external positions. The frozen Italian company remained in formation, close enough to touch but somehow distant, as if separated by more than just physical space. And throughout the fortress, in doorways and on walls, and in the spaces between buildings, other soldiers appeared. British troops in khaki from the Great War, French Foreign Legion in white kepis, Ottoman cavalry in turbans and mail, all frozen in moments of action or rest, all trapped in whatever time period the fortress had captured them from. Sergeant Cooper's radio, which had been monitoring Italian frequencies throughout the approach, suddenly erupted with transmissions in multiple languages: Italian, German, English, French, Arabic, all overlapping, all reporting positions and actions from different battles fought in different years. The fortress was not just a structure. It was a recording medium, a trap that captured soldiers and units from every conflict that had occurred in this region, holding them in suspended animation, or perhaps replaying their actions endlessly in a loop that observers perceived as frozen figures. And behind them, through the gate they had just entered, the Italian assault force was arriving, but they were not entering the same fortress. Through the translucent walls, Clayton could see Italian tanks and infantry deploying around what they perceived as a British defensive position, preparing to attack something that was not quite the same fortress that T2 Patrol now occupied. They were in the same location, but in different versions of the same location, and when the Italian attack began, Clayton could not predict whether the bullets and shells would cross the threshold between versions or whether both forces would simply occupy the same space without being able to affect each other. The Italian assault began with artillery fire, ranging shots from their light tanks, aiming at what they perceived as defensive positions on the fortress walls. Clayton watched the muzzle flashes from the Italian tanks through the translucent walls, saw the shells traveling toward the fortress, and braced for impact. The shells struck something. There was sound and vibration, but the explosions occurred in a space that was adjacent to but not quite coincident with the courtyard where T2 Patrol had taken cover behind their trucks. The detonations felt muffled, distant, as if happening on the other side of a membrane that separated two versions of the same location. But then something changed. As the Italian infantry advanced toward the fortress gate, the same gate that T2 Patrol had entered minutes earlier, the boundaries between different temporal versions began to blur. Clayton saw Italian soldiers passing through the gate, saw them advancing into the courtyard, but they appeared ghostly and insubstantial, moving through the same space occupied by the frozen Italian company from an earlier era. The new arrivals seemed unaware of their predecessors, walking through them without apparent collision, as if each group existed in its own timeline, but all timelines were being compressed into the same physical location by whatever mechanism controlled the fortress. Lieutenant Hallworth, positioned near one of the trucks with a Lewis gun, called out to Clayton, "Sir, they can't see us. The Italians are advancing, but they're moving past our position without reacting. We're not visible to them, or they're not in the same version of the fortress that we are." He paused, then added urgently, "But sir, some of the frozen soldiers are starting to move. The Italian company that was in formation, they're waking up or becoming active or..." Clayton looked toward the frozen Italian company and saw what Hallworth meant. The soldiers who had been locked in motionless formation were beginning to move, slowly at first, then with increasing fluidity, as if time inside the fortress was accelerating or catching up to the present. They lowered their weapons from present arms, broke formation, and began reacting to the presence of both the British patrol and their own countrymen who were assaulting through the gate. But they were reacting as if they were in a different battle entirely. They took cover positions, began firing at targets Clayton could not see, shouted orders that referenced enemy positions that did not exist in the current tactical situation. They were fighting their own version of a battle, perhaps a battle they had been fighting when the fortress first captured them, a battle that was now being replayed while completely new battles occurred simultaneously in the same space. Sergeant Cooper, monitoring the radio, reported increasingly frantic Italian transmissions. "Sir, they're taking casualties. They're reporting fire from multiple directions, including from positions inside the fortress that they cleared moments ago. They think we've got reinforcements, but sir..." He paused, listening to his headset. "Sir, they're also reporting contact with enemy forces in Ottoman uniforms. They think they're being attacked by Turkish troops. Their officers are screaming that it's impossible, that Turkey isn't even in this war, but their men are reporting what they're seeing." The fortress was activating. Every soldier and unit it had captured across centuries of warfare were becoming active simultaneously, each fighting their own battle, each perceiving different enemies and different tactical situations, but all occupying the same impossible space. The courtyard filled with figures, British troops from the Great War, fighting Germans who weren't present, French Foreign Legion engaging in hand-to-hand combat with opponents that existed in a different century, Ottoman cavalry charging across ground that multiple other units also occupied. The noise was overwhelming, but also strangely muffled, as if each timeline had its own acoustic properties that didn't quite overlap with the others. And caught in the middle of this temporal maelstrom, two modern forces, Clayton's LRDG patrol and the Italian assault company, trying to fight each other while navigating through layers of battles from different eras. Clayton made a split-second decision. They could not fight in this environment. They could not navigate through spaces where multiple realities overlapped and where the rules of normal combat no longer applied. Their only option was to escape, to find their way back through the gate before the fortress compressed all its captured timelines into complete chaos or vanished again, taking everyone inside with it into whatever liminal space it occupied between manifestations. "All vehicles, prepare to withdraw," Clayton shouted into the radio. "Back through the gate, same route we entered. Move now." He gestured to the men around him, directing them back to their trucks. But as they began to move, Private Bingham called out in alarm. "Sir, the gate's not there anymore. Or there are multiple gates in different locations, all leading different directions." Clayton looked and saw what Bingham meant. Where there had been one gate, the entrance they had driven through, there were now at least 5, each occupying a slightly different position, each appearing to lead to different versions of the exterior desert. Through one gate, he could see the Italian assault force, very close and very real. Through another, empty desert under a sky that was the wrong color. Through a third, what appeared to be a French colonial column from decades earlier. The fortress was no longer maintaining even the illusion of spatial coherence. It was collapsing into some kind of superposition where all possible states existed simultaneously, where every battle it had ever witnessed was occurring at once, where the boundaries between times and places had dissolved completely. Lieutenant Hallworth, still maintaining his role as navigator, even in circumstances that defied navigation, shouted over the chaos. "Sir, we need to choose a gate and commit. I can't tell which one leads back to our timeline, but staying here isn't survivable. The longer we remain, the more we're becoming part of the fortress's collection. I can feel it. We're starting to slow down, to freeze like those other soldiers. The fortress is trying to capture us the way it captured them." Clayton felt it too. A gradual increase in resistance to movement, as if the air was thickening, as if time itself was beginning to congeal around them. His thoughts felt slower, his reactions delayed. Around him, Some of his men were already showing signs of temporal capture. Standing in mid-action, their movements stuttering and freezing, their expressions locked in the moment before they became another set of frozen soldiers that future visitors would observe and wonder about. He forced himself to think through the resistance, to evaluate the gates. The one showing the Italian assault force was clearly current timeline. He could see details of Italian uniforms and equipment that matched 1942 standards. But exiting through that gate meant driving directly into enemy fire. The one showing empty desert might be safe, but the sky color was wrong. It could lead to a different time period entirely. Then he noticed something about the third gate, the one showing the French colonial column. Through that gate, in the far distance, he could see a vehicle that appeared to be a British LRDG truck. It was possible that this gate was showing not past or future, but a parallel version of current reality, a timeline where the British patrol existed but hadn't yet entered the fortress. That one, he decided, pointing to the third gate. All vehicles through that gate, maximum speed, do not stop for anything. If we get separated, rally point is Kufra Oasis. Move now. The patrol surged forward, trucks accelerating across the courtyard, weaving between frozen soldiers from multiple eras, avoiding combatants who were fighting battles that had already ended or hadn't yet begun. The Italian assault force, visible through the translucent walls and also through one of the gates, attempted to engage, but their fire was ineffective. The bullets passed through spaces where T2 patrol had been moments earlier or would be moments later, but not through the exact slice of time that the patrol currently occupied. Clayton's truck, in the lead, reached the chosen gate at full speed. There was a sensation of resistance, like driving through heavy water or thick mud, and then a moment of complete disorientation where all sensory input ceased. No sight, no sound, no feeling of movement or position, just absolute emptiness, as if they had passed through a space between spaces, a void that existed outside the normal flow of reality. The sensation lasted either microseconds or hours. Clayton could not determine which, and then they were through. The trucks emerged into normal desert, empty sand and rock under a sky that was the correct shade of blue, the sun in a position that corresponded to late morning in mid-March. Clayton immediately called for a halt and a head count. All 11 trucks had made it through. All 42 men were accounted for, though several were disoriented, and one was unconscious, apparently having fainted during the transition. No casualties from enemy fire, no mechanical breakdowns. They had escaped. Hallworth conducted an immediate navigation check, taking sunshots and compass bearings. "Sir," he reported after working through his calculations, "we're approximately 75 miles northwest of where we entered the fortress." "I can't explain the displacement. We should be at the same location, just outside the fortress walls, but somehow passing through that gate transported us across 75 miles of desert instantaneously. Or we spent enough time in the fortress that we don't remember, time during which we drove here under our own power. I can't determine which is more likely." Sergeant Cooper's radio check produced more disturbing information. "Sir, I'm monitoring Italian frequencies. They're still in contact at the fortress location, or what they perceive as the fortress location. They're reporting British forces withdrawing through the installation, significant enemy resistance from multiple directions, and requesting reinforcement. But sir, they're also reporting that the British trucks they're pursuing just vanished. One moment we were visible to them, the next moment we simply ceased to exist. Their officers are ordering medical evaluation for combat stress." Clayton allowed himself a moment to process what they had survived. They had entered a fortress that existed outside normal space-time, had witnessed battles from multiple eras occurring simultaneously, had navigated through overlapping realities where the normal rules of physics and causality did not apply, and had escaped through a gate that had somehow transported them 75 miles from their entry point. Every man in the patrol had seen things that could not be explained within any rational framework, and they would all have to write reports documenting experiences that would sound like hallucinations or fabrications if not corroborated by multiple independent witnesses. But before he could issue orders to prepare those reports, Private Bingham called out from his position as rear security. "Sir, the fortress, I can still see it. It's behind us, maybe 10 miles distant, visible on the horizon." Clayton raised his binoculars and confirmed the sighting. The fortress stood on the horizon, clearly visible in the morning light, its walls solid and real. But Hallworth's navigation placed them 75 miles from where the fortress should be. Either the fortress had moved, had relocated itself across that distance, or the space between their current position and the fortress was folded or compressed in ways that made conventional distance measurements meaningless. And as they watched, the fortress vanished. Not gradually, not obscured by heat shimmer or atmospheric conditions, but simply gone between one moment and the next, as if it had never existed. The horizon showed nothing but empty desert, the curvature of the earth, and the vast, indifferent sky. The radio traffic from the Italian forces ceased simultaneously, the frequencies falling silent as if their transmitters had been switched off all at once. Whatever battle they had been fighting at the fortress location, it had ended, either because they had withdrawn or because the fortress had taken them the way it had taken so many other soldiers across so many centuries. Captain Clayton looked at his men, exhausted, frightened, but alive and intact. They had accomplished their mission. They had located Fortezza Miraggio, had determined it was not a conventional military installation that could be captured or destroyed, had gathered intelligence that would be crucial for understanding the phenomenon. But they had also learned that some objectives could not be achieved through conventional military action, that some enemies could not be defeated because they existed outside the framework where victory and defeat had meaning. "Log all instrument readings," Clayton ordered. "I want every piece of navigation data, every radio intercept, every observation documented in writing before memories fade or rationalize what we experienced. We're returning to Kufra immediately, and I want a complete intelligence package prepared for transmission to Cairo within 24 hours." He paused, looking back at the empty horizon where the fortress had been. "Whatever that place is, whatever mechanism controls it, it's beyond our capability to assess or engage. Higher command will need to decide how to handle it. Our job was reconnaissance. We've accomplished that. Now we survived long enough to report what we found." T2. Patrol reached Kufra Oasis on March 15th. After 3 days of hard driving across terrain, they now navigated with renewed appreciation for the normal, predictable behavior of space and time. Captain Clayton filed his initial report via radio the evening they arrived, using careful language that described the fortress as an installation, exhibiting anomalous properties requiring scientific evaluation, rather than using words like impossible or supernatural. The full written report, compiled from individual witness statements and supported by navigation logs and radio intercept data, was delivered by courier aircraft to 8th Army Headquarters in Cairo on March 17th. It landed on the desk of Brigadier John Shearer, Deputy Director of Military Intelligence for the Middle East Theater, on the morning of March 18th. Shearer read the report twice, checked the authentication codes to verify it had actually originated from Captain Clayton rather than being some form of disinformation, then summoned his senior intelligence analyst and the chief scientific advisor attached to Middle East Command. What followed was a 5-hour meeting in a secure conference room where the report was dissected, paragraph by paragraph, witness statement by witness statement, attempting to determine whether T2 Patrol had encountered a genuine anomaly or had experienced some combination of navigation error, combat stress, and environmental conditions that had produced a shared hallucination consistent enough to fool experienced desert soldiers. The evidence supporting genuine anomaly was substantial. Navigation logs from Lieutenant Hallworth showed systematic discrepancies across multiple independent methods: sun compass, dead reckoning, celestial navigation, that could not be explained by instrument failure or operator error. The discrepancies were consistent with the hypothesis that the space occupied by the fortress did not obey normal geometric principles, that distances and directions within that region were variable in ways that made conventional navigation impossible. Radio intercept logs from Sergeant Cooper documented transmissions in Italian that referenced dates ranging from the mid-1930s to the mid-1950s current war, sometimes on the same frequency within seconds of each other, a pattern inconsistent with normal radio propagation or even with deliberate deception broadcasts. Most compelling were the 42 independent witness statements, all describing the same core phenomena. A fortress that appeared and disappeared, exhibited different properties depending on observer position and time of observation, contained what appeared to be soldiers from multiple historical periods frozen in various poses, and demonstrated the ability to transport objects or persons across significant distances without normal transit through the intervening space. The consistency of these accounts across enlisted men and officers, across different specialties and levels of education, suggested either a genuine shared experience or a conspiracy of fabrication so sophisticated that it would require all 42 men to coordinate their deceptions in advance and maintain them under separate interrogation. The scientific advisor, Dr. Edward Carmichael, a Cambridge physicist who had been seconded to military intelligence to evaluate technical intelligence from captured enemy equipment, approached the problem from theoretical principles. He noted that recent work in theoretical physics, particularly Einstein's field equations and the implications of general relativity, suggested that under extreme conditions, space-time could exhibit properties that appeared paradoxical from a classical perspective. Regions of intense gravitational fields or electromagnetic anomalies might create local distortions where the normal relationship between space and time broke down, where causality became ambiguous, where multiple timelines could theoretically overlap or intersect. If we accept the premise that such a region exists in the Fezzan, Carmichael wrote in his assessment attached to the intelligence analysis, then many of the observations reported by T2 Patrol become explicable within known physics, albeit at the extreme end of theoretical prediction. A sufficiently intense magnetic anomaly combined with unusual geological formations could create a zone where electromagnetic phenomena behave unpredictably, affecting compasses and radio equipment. If this zone also exhibits gravitational properties we don't yet understand, it might affect the perception of time and space, creating the illusion or the reality of temporal displacement. The fortress itself might be a perfectly ordinary Italian installation that happens to be located in this anomalous zone, and the zone's properties create the appearance of multiple versions existing simultaneously. This explanation satisfied some of the analysts, but not Brigadier Shearer. Dr. Carmichael's hypothesis doesn't account for the historical reports, he noted. The Tuareg have been describing similar phenomena in this region for centuries, long before the Italians constructed anything there. Either the fortress is genuinely ancient and multiple armies have attempted to use it across different eras, or the phenomenon is independent of any physical structure and simply affects whatever happens to be in that location. Either way, we're dealing with something that predates the current war and will likely persist after it. The meeting concluded with a classified assessment that acknowledged the phenomenon as genuine but unexplainable within current scientific frameworks, designated the region as operationally unreliable for military purposes, and recommended that future operations avoid the area entirely. The fortress, whether Italian installation or temporal anomaly, was to be left alone, not engaged, not surveilled, not incorporated into any operational planning. The risk of losing personnel or equipment to whatever mechanism controlled the phenomenon was deemed unacceptable relative to any potential intelligence or tactical gain. But the phenomenon did not cooperate with military preference to ignore it. Throughout the remainder of 1942 and into 1943, multiple reports accumulated from both British and Axis forces of anomalous observations in the Fezzan region. An RAF reconnaissance aircraft photographed what appeared to be a large, fortified installation in March 1943. But when a follow-up flight was dispatched to the same coordinates 2 days later, the area was empty desert. Italian forces reported encountering British patrols in locations where British forces had no presence, pursuing them into terrain where the patrols vanished without trace. Tuareg informants continued to report that the Qasr al-Jinn was active, that it was capturing soldiers from both sides, that the desert around it had become dangerous and unpredictable. The most detailed subsequent encounter occurred in November 1942, when a Free French force operating in the Fezzan as part of General Leclerc's campaign against Italian positions encountered the fortress during a navigation error that brought them into the anomalous region. Their report, filed through French military channels and shared with British intelligence, corroborated virtually every detail of Clayton's account. The French observed the fortress appearing and disappearing, experienced navigation failures across multiple independent systems, reported radio intercepts in languages and from time periods that should not have been present, and witnessed frozen soldiers from what they identified as Ottoman, Italian, and British units, all occupying the same space. The French commander, unwilling to risk his force in an environment he could not understand, withdrew immediately and recommended that the region be designated as terrain impracticable, impassable terrain unsuitable for military operations. Captain Clayton himself was called to Cairo in June 1942 for detailed debriefing by intelligence specialists who wanted to understand every aspect of the fortress encounter. He spent a week being interviewed, answering questions, reviewing his written reports, and attempting to articulate experiences that resisted articulation. The intelligence officers were professional and thorough, but Clayton could sense their fundamental discomfort with information that did not fit into any existing analytical framework. They wanted to classify the fortress as enemy installation or natural phenomenon, to assign it to some category where it could be addressed through standard procedures. But it resisted classification. It was simultaneously physical structure and spatial anomaly, military objective and physical impossibility, Italian fortress and Tuareg legend, and something far older than either. At the end of the debriefing week, Clayton was informed that his report had been classified at the highest level, that he and his men were prohibited from discussing the incident except through official channels, and that T2 patrol would not be assigned to any further operations in the Fezzan region. He was also told unofficially that his account was believed and that the decision to classify the information was not a reflection of doubt about its accuracy, but rather an acknowledgement that the military had encountered something it could not currently handle. "We're fighting a war with defined enemies using understood technologies," one of the intelligence officers told him. "We don't have the capacity to also fight against phenomena that violate physical laws, so we're simply noting its existence, marking that region as operationally forbidden, and hoping that whatever the fortress is, it remains neutral in this conflict." Clayton returned to field operations with his patrol in July 1942, participating in reconnaissance operations throughout the North African campaign until the Axis surrender in Tunisia in May 1943. He never returned to the Fezzan, never again saw the fortress, never experienced another incident where normal space and time behaved in ways that defied explanation. But the memory remained vivid, more vivid than most of his combat experiences, more disturbing than encounters with enemy forces he understood. The fortress had been other, alien, a reminder that despite humanity's pretensions to understanding the world through science and mapping it through survey, there remained places where the rules changed, where the universe revealed itself to be stranger and more flexible than the models suggested. Lieutenant Hallworth, promoted to captain and assigned to military intelligence, spent part of 1943 attempting to collect and analyze all available information about spatial anomalies in desert regions. He compiled reports from multiple theaters, North Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, documenting cases where navigation failed systematically, where installations appeared on aerial photographs but could not be located on the ground, where military units reported encounters with forces that should not have existed in those locations. The pattern he identified suggested that the fortress in the Fezzan was not unique, that similar phenomena existed in other remote regions where intense magnetic fields or unusual geology created conditions that distorted normal space-time. His analysis was filed with military intelligence archives and classified, not because it was doubted, but because it had no immediate operational application and because acknowledging such phenomena officially would create more problems than it solved. Sergeant Cooper, who had monitored the radio transmissions from multiple timelines, was never quite the same after the fortress encounter. He continued to serve effectively throughout the war, but other signal specialists noted that he would sometimes stop what he was doing and listen to empty frequencies, as if hearing transmissions that no one else could detect. After the war, he worked for the BBC as a radio technician and occasionally reported to colleagues that late at night, when atmospheric conditions were right, he could still pick up the Italian transmissions from the fortress, routine garrison traffic from soldiers who might still be trapped in whatever temporal loop the fortress had created, fighting battles that had ended decades ago or perhaps never ended at all, transmitting into a void that sometimes allowed their signals to leak through into normal space-time. The fortress itself remained. Tuareg reports continued throughout the war and into the post-war period, describing the Qasr al-Jin as active and dangerous, a place where travelers disappeared and where the desert did not follow its own rules. After Libya gained independence in 1951, the new government attempted to investigate the phenomenon, sending survey teams into the region to locate and document the fortress. Some of these teams returned reporting that they had found nothing but empty desert. Others returned with accounts similar to those of T2 patrol. One team did not return at all, vanishing without trace in an area where rescue parties found no evidence of mechanical breakdown, no sign of conflict, no bodies, just abandoned vehicles and equipment that suggested the team had dismounted and walked into the desert, perhaps following something they saw, perhaps drawn by some property of the anomalous space itself. The official record of British operations in the Fezzan during World War II makes no mention of Fortezza Miraggio or any encounters with anomalous phenomena. The Long-Range Desert Group's operational history, published in multiple volumes after the war, documents T2 patrol's activities in March 1942 as a routine reconnaissance mission that gathered intelligence on Italian dispositions and returned to base without incident. Captain Clayton's classified report exists in military intelligence archives, but it was not declassified with most other World War II intelligence documents during the standard 50-year and 75-year declassification cycles. It remains restricted, accessible only through specific request and with appropriate security clearance, filed under a category that suggests technical intelligence on advanced enemy weapons systems rather than what it actually contains. This classification was not accidental. Within weeks of receiving Clayton's report, British military intelligence initiated a quiet effort to consolidate all information relating to spatial and temporal anomalies observed during military operations. The project, never formally named but referred to in internal correspondence as the Anomalous Terrain Documentation, collected reports from multiple theaters documenting phenomena that could not be explained within conventional frameworks, navigation failures in specific geographic locations, radio intercepts from sources that should not exist, visual observations of military forces from wrong time periods or wrong armies, structures that appeared and disappeared according to no predictable pattern. The consolidation effort revealed that Clayton's encounter was not unique. Similar reports existed from operations in the empty quarter of Arabia, the Taklamakan Desert in western China, the interior of the Australian outback, and remote regions of the Andes. The common factors were geographic isolation, extreme environmental conditions, unusual geology or magnetic properties, and in many cases, local folklore predating military operations that described the same phenomena in supernatural or religious language. The pattern suggested that certain locations on Earth exhibited properties that made them unsuitable for conventional military operations because the basic assumptions of navigation, causality, and consistent physical law did not reliably apply. The British approach to this information was pragmatic suppression. The reports were classified at the highest levels, marked as requiring special handling, and essentially removed from standard intelligence channels. Officers who filed such reports were not disciplined or accused of fabrication. Their accounts were accepted as accurate observations, but they were quietly reassigned away from intelligence roles and discouraged from discussing their experiences. The goal was not to deny the phenomena, but to quarantine information about them, to prevent the knowledge from spreading through military organizations where it might undermine confidence in scientific principles that military operations depended upon. An Internal War Office memorandum dated August 1943 articulated the reasoning. Personnel exposed to anomalous phenomena demonstrate measurable decreases in confidence regarding navigation instruments, radio equipment, and other technical systems essential to modern warfare. This loss of confidence persists even when operating in normal environments, creating operational risk that outweighs any intelligence value gained from documenting the phenomena. Current policy: acknowledge phenomena exist, mark affected regions as operationally unsuitable, suppress detailed information to prevent degradation of confidence in technical systems among general personnel. The United States military, when they gained access to British intelligence files after entering the war, adopted a similar approach with additional scientific investigation. The Office of Strategic Services established a small research group, never more than 6 personnel, tasked with collecting and analyzing reports of anomalous phenomena from all theaters. This group, operating under the cover designation Technical Analysis Section, reviewed Clayton's report along with dozens of similar accounts from American, British, Free French, and even captured German and Italian sources. Their conclusion, documented in a classified assessment dated December 1944, acknowledged that genuine anomalies existed but could not be explained or exploited using current scientific knowledge. The phenomena appeared to involve localized distortions in space-time geometry. The assessment noted, possibly related to intense magnetic fields, unusual gravitational properties, or quantum effects not yet understood by mainstream physics. They are not enemy weapons, not subject to military countermeasures, and not predictable enough to be exploited operationally. Recommendation: designate affected regions as restricted zones, continue monitoring for changes in activity level, but allocate no resources to investigation beyond passive observation. These phenomena are beyond current scientific and military capability to address. This recommendation was implemented and maintained through the Cold War era and beyond. The fortress in the Fezzan, along with similar anomalous sites in other remote regions, was designated in classified military databases as Terrain Category Anomalous Restricted, a classification that instructed military planners to avoid routing operations through those areas whenever possible. The designation did not explain why the terrain was restricted, preventing junior planners from learning about phenomena that might affect their confidence in standard procedures. Only personnel with specific need-to-know and appropriate clearance levels had access to the actual reports documenting what made these regions anomalous. But the fortress did not respect military preferences to be ignored. Throughout the Cold War, reports continued to accumulate. Soviet forces operating in North Africa and the Middle East during the 1960s and 70s encountered similar phenomena and filed reports through their intelligence channels that eventually became accessible to Western intelligence after the Soviet collapse. The KGB maintained a special department, Department 13, according to defector reports, tasked with investigating paranormal and anomalous phenomena that might have intelligence or military applications. Their files on the Fezzan Fortress, when they became partially available in the late 1990s, corroborated British and American accounts and added new details based on Soviet scientific investigations. The Soviets had attempted a more aggressive approach. In 1967, a team of Soviet scientists and military personnel, operating with Libyan government permission during the Gaddafi regime's close relationship with Moscow, established a temporary research station near the coordinates where the fortress had been reported. Their mission was to document the phenomenon using modern sensors, magnetometers, gravimeters, radiation detectors, electromagnetic spectrum analyzers, and to determine whether the anomaly could be understood or controlled. The station operated for 6 months before being abruptly abandoned. The official Soviet report stated that the research had been completed and the site held no strategic value. The classified report, leaked decades later, told a different story. The Soviet team had successfully documented the fortress appearing and disappearing on multiple occasions. They had measured associated magnetic and gravitational anomalies that exceeded any natural occurrence documented elsewhere on Earth. They had recorded radio transmissions from inside the fortress that appeared to originate from multiple time periods simultaneously. And they had lost 3 personnel, 2 scientists, and 1 military officer, who had entered the fortress during one of its manifestation periods and never emerged, even when the fortress reappeared later. The remaining team members reported psychological effects from prolonged exposure to the anomaly, disorientation, temporal confusion, difficulty maintaining chronological memory of events. The station was evacuated, the site was marked as forbidden in Soviet military databases, and the research was discontinued with the assessment that the phenomenon was hostile to human presence and resistant to scientific analysis using available methodology. The modern era brought new tools and new attempts at understanding. After Libya descended into civil conflict in 2011 and large portions of the country became ungoverned space, various intelligence agencies renewed interest in anomalous sites that had been difficult to investigate during the Gaddafi regime. Satellite surveillance of the Fezzan region, using high-resolution imaging and synthetic aperture radar capable of penetrating sand cover, documented a structure appearing intermittently at coordinates matching historical reports of the fortress. The structure appeared in satellite imagery on average once every 18 months, remained visible for periods ranging from 3 hours to 4 days, then disappeared completely. The appearance cycle showed no correlation with lunar phases, solar activity, seismic events, or any other measurable external variable. In 2019, a private research team, funded by a technology entrepreneur interested in anomalous phenomena, obtained permission from one of Libya's competing governments to conduct ground investigation of the site. The team included physicists, geologists, and archaeologists equipped with modern sensors and documentation equipment. They established a base camp 5 miles from the target coordinates and conducted remote observation for 3 months, waiting for the fortress to manifest. When it appeared in September 2019, the team documented it extensively using drones, ground-penetrating radar, electromagnetic sensors, and visual observation. Their findings, published in an obscure academic journal before being classified by multiple governments, confirmed every major element of Clayton's 1942 report. The fortress was physically real when present, solid concrete and stone construction, consistent with Italian colonial military architecture of the 1930s. But it exhibited impossible properties: interior spaces larger than exterior dimensions, navigation equipment failure in its vicinity, radio transmissions from multiple time periods, and most disturbingly, the presence of what the team described as temporal echoes, figures visible through windows or on walls that appeared to be human but showed no life signs on thermal imaging, did not respond to external stimuli, and seemed to be locked in repetitive action loops. The team attempted to enter the fortress but experienced severe psychological effects at the threshold. Overwhelming disorientation, nausea, a sensation that one team member described as trying to walk through time that was flowing in multiple directions simultaneously. They withdrew without entering, documented everything they could from external observation, and evacuated the site when the fortress vanished after 8 hours. Their report concluded with an assessment that echoed British intelligence evaluations from 80 years earlier. The fortress represents a phenomenon beyond current scientific explanation, possibly involving exotic physics related to space-time geometry or quantum effects at macroscopic scale. It poses significant danger to personnel who approach too closely or attempt to enter. It cannot be secured, controlled, or neutralized using available technology. Recommendation: establish permanent restricted zone around coordinates, maintain surveillance for changes in manifestation pattern, but do not attempt direct investigation or intervention until theoretical physics advances to a level where the underlying mechanism can be understood. This recommendation was implemented in a limited fashion. Several national space agencies were quietly requested to monitor the coordinates through satellite surveillance, and the information was shared through classified intelligence channels. But no international consensus emerged on how to handle the phenomenon, and no resources were allocated to sustained investigation. The fortress remains what it has always been, an anomaly that appears and disappears according to its own pattern, capturing or consuming those who enter, preserving soldiers and battles from multiple eras in some form of temporal stasis, existing in our world but not entirely bound by its rules. The Tuareg never needed scientific studies to tell them this. Their oral traditions, maintained across generations, preserve knowledge of the Qasr al-Jinn that extends back centuries before modern military forces encountered it. The fortress is described in their legends as a place where time is broken, where the jinn, powerful spirits of pre-Islamic tradition, constructed a palace that exists in all times and no time, that captures those who approach it with hostile intent, that preserves forever the violence that has been done in its vicinity. The legends say the fortress cannot be destroyed because it is not entirely in the world to be destroyed, cannot be avoided because it appears where travelers need to pass, cannot be escaped once entered because its interior leads not back to the desert, but to other times, other versions of the same location, other battles fought by other armies. Modern science struggles to find language for what the fortress represents. Theoretical physicists speak of closed, time-like curves, of space-time manifolds with exotic topology, of quantum superposition at macroscopic scale. But these are mathematical abstractions, attempts to force the phenomenon into frameworks that may not apply. The fortress exists. It has existed for at least centuries, possibly millennia. It will continue to exist, appearing and disappearing in the Sahara, capturing fragments of every war fought near it, adding new layers of frozen soldiers to its impossible interior. Captain Clayton died in 1983, having lived a full life after the war, but never having returned to the Fezzan or encountered another phenomenon that challenged his understanding of reality as fundamentally as the fortress had. His classified report remains in British military intelligence archives, one data point among hundreds documenting encounters with things that should not exist but do. Lieutenant Hallworth's analysis of anomalous terrain, compiled over years of intelligence work, suggests the fortress is not unique, that perhaps dozens of similar sites exist worldwide in remote regions where geology and magnetism and unknown factors create conditions that distort space-time in ways that trap fragments of human activity, preserving them outside the normal flow of causality. The fortress stands, when it stands, as a reminder that despite humanity's technological sophistication and scientific knowledge, the universe remains stranger and more complex than our models suggest. Some ground is cursed, not by supernatural forces, but by physics we don't yet understand. Some battles never end because the space where they were fought cannot release them. and some military installations cannot be captured or destroyed because they exist in more than one timeline simultaneously. Their allegiance to any particular army irrelevant because they belong to all armies and to none. Permanent monuments to the human capacity for violence and the universe's capacity to remember it forever.